So for an episode that had a fair amount of spice, I mean, this is probably the first time I've ever seen a fairy used as a boob shield instead of doing the typical kind of like white black bars or misty foggy scenes using the fairy that we were introduced to recently. It's kind of comedy gold, all things considered, and it's far less distracting than having maybe 20% of the screen visible, since we generally see the TV broadcast and not the uncensored version. But it actually kind of reveals a big amount of information in terms of like what kind of happened with this kind of isekai formula, because what once was a video game became a new reality for many people, and I love the idea that they're casually exploring that information outside of Kana's perspective and point of view. Like the idea that there's this one guild member who very much is like, what this character, this person is doing very much seems like skills a player would have. I should probably confront her and ask her, because worst case scenario, she's gonna think I'm insane because, the idea of menus and stats and custom abilities. Unless you're a player, you're not gonna understand what that means. And then as he's doing that, he bumps into someone who was kind of teased, I think it was like 2 episodes back, give or take. And turns out they used to play the game together. But what's interesting about that reunion isn't that there's more players at this point. It's the fact that they kind of were trapped at different intervals. Kana just recently woke up. This one character has been there for 10 years as an adventurer, and then for the other it's been about 3. So there's a very big time discrepancy, and that's really interesting because, the idea of having multiple people potentially be trapped inside what is now their new world, is it actually based on their game? Is it actually the game that became a reality? Nonetheless, they went from an original world to now a fictional world that is basically reality to them. They can taste food, they can feel pain. What once was NPCs are now real people, right? But the idea that they all came in at different points. Now, the question is, how does that represent and correlate to their original world, right? Because we know the whole flickering of the power because, this world, despite its high-tech everything else, apparently they don't have backup generators in this world. And the fact that, they didn't immediately kick in when the power went out, Kana ends up dying, and now it's in her game. The idea that the one character seemingly got trapped when the game servers shut down, but the idea that there is such that big time lapse, I mean, I'm curious to see if it's going to be a pretty big grab bag of ideas of some characters died, some were logged in when it happened, other people, was it a wish? There's a lot we don't know, and I don't expect to reveal many of those mysteries by the time we reach episode 12 or anything, but the idea that they're not just going so typical of like they all ended up most likely in the exact same way, or they all ended up in the same time period, like, December 1st, 2022, everyone got trapped playing this game, right? No, it's like everything is so spread out, and that makes it a lot more interesting. I mean, imagining going for 10 years thinking you're potentially the only person in this now new reality, and then all these years later you meet up not only with someone you used to play with, but someone who's only been there for 3. There's some interesting questions that can definitely now occur with that, and I'm going to be interested to see how long it takes Kana to bump into some of these people and the conversations that can be had, because, I mean, the last person she interacted with who basically she recognized as someone who used to come from her world, was a crazy kid who was on a murder spree, so she couldn't really have a conversation. But a lot of these guild members, very much she could have that conversation with, so that'll be pretty interesting to see where they want to take it. But that wasn't like the main point of this episode, even though I think it was the most interesting point. Mostly it was just kind of like a fanservice fun adventure episode that honestly did it better than a lot of swimsuit episodes out there. I mean, the idea of her just taking on a casual quest of killing something that once again would probably take an army on a lucky day to secure, this very rare meat, but, a creature that could probably give most armies a run for their money. And the fact that she takes a couple of people who, we've been bumping into from time to time, and just so happens one of them is actually royalty as well, alongside that little prince who, has always been a really fun dynamic when she was interacting with. And the idea that, you can just have these casual conversations with Mother Dearest, who is talking about how, like, first she's a little upset because she thinks Scargo did something bad to this girl, like, wait, did he fill you up? Oh, wait, no, you're in love with him. Ho, 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 you want to date my son, do you? Well, he's an adult, do whatever the hell you want. I love how she can be such a flirt, a troll, or just an absolute menace. And no matter which side of Kana we're dealing with, especially now that she has a miniature Kana sitting on her shoulder, mirroring those ridiculous reactions, it's absolutely amazing. And I love the kind of I think my favorite subtle aspect about this show and I've mentioned it in different videos when they pop up, is when she summons her things and the characters respond, right? I mean, in this episode, we get this like giant dragon-like bird, and the idea of them just freaking out, or just like them sitting by the campfire, and the fact that Cerber Wolf is right there, and the idea that for them, like, that is like the bodyguard. Nothing will deal damage to them if that giant beast is there. But anyone with, you know, any sort of brain activity going on would be fearful of a giant three-headed dog that is sitting there staring at you, and you really don't see those all too often. And then just casually summoning, like, the dragon and everything like that. It was just so fun to see their reactions, because they were the star of this episode, I gotta be honest. Much as I love Kena, just seeing these two together, interacting to the absurdity that was the Kena train, is something I could probably watch multiple episodes in a row before even getting anything serious happening again. And then to just kind of casually have the bath scene where, you know, they're like literally playing into all the tropes and gimmicks that anime is known for, especially early 2000s anime. But by having like the fairy cover her up, or just like the flirting scenes in the bath, it's just, there was something charming about that you just don't get to see in anime too often. On surface level, it's basically looks like everything we've seen before, but the shit they were saying to each other, which is so interesting, especially considering that Kena is a mother, especially to like the potential love interest to this other like royal princess here. And I'm like, this show is a jack of all trades, and I absolutely love him. And there's quite a few shows this season airing that are kind of doing a bunch of different things. I mean, Sabiki Bisco, as an example, is another show that does a whole bunch of different stuff, but I love how this one just, it can be serious, it can be, like with last week, is super serious, it can be super, like, horny funny, like in the middle of this episode, or it can bring thought-provoking questions about how they all ended up there and the idea of the time discrepancy in terms of how long certain people have been there, which explains why Kena is just recently activating in this world where other people have been there for like 10 years. There's some questions to be had here, and I'm excited to see what people might kind of theorycraft about, given like now knowing a bit more about these other players, not just like kind of under the assumption that they all ended up in the same kind of like, okay, you know, Kena died obviously in the hospital, but maybe, you know, the server shut off at the same time, but now there's a bigger question there about why they all ended up at different times. Like, is it a connection? Is it a status level within the game that triggered something with the real world to linking into this now becoming the world? It's hard to say, but there's some interesting questions and thoughts to be had, and these episodes are damn fun for sure. As per usual, though, I'm going to pass the torch over to you, because this show has been definitely a very fun one to discuss. I've seen a lot of great conversations, just from simple remarks to actually some interesting ideas about what it could all mean about them being in this world. But I think episodes like these, I think, are definitely needed, because not only does it just ease the tension, last week was a pretty tense episode, all things considered, but easing the tension in this way to then immediately giving, I think, what many people wanted. Like, people probably are like, I wish Kena could have had a conversation with this murderous kid, but the murderous kid didn't have his marbles all in one basket there, so of course she couldn't. This episode comes around, and though we don't have it with Kena, we have two separate players who were able to have a conversation. So it kind of gives you, in a way that we weren't expecting, and maybe you were disappointed not seeing last week. And like, it's just so good how the show always gives us what we want, just sometimes when we least expect it. But thoughts and feelings yourself down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.